So, the Steam Awards are here. We all knew it was coming, we all knew it was going to be funny. Every year, Dead by Daylight gets into a little push to nominate the game for Steam's Labour of Love award. Every year it draws some flack, people laughing or lamenting the problems the year has brought with it. And as 2025 draws to a close, many people were expecting another grovelling tweet, another damning YouTube video by Otts, maybe Scott Jund and a few others, and another joke to be passed around like a football for the rest of the year until the next Steam Awards. But this time there's no mention of it anywhere on Behaviour socials. No tweet asking nicely to please vote for us. Almost like they've made some really serious mistakes recently, and more pressingly, that they know they've made some serious mistakes. So that just begs the question, were Behaviour right to withhold that tweet? Does Dead by Daylight truly deserve the Labour of Love nomination? Or perhaps even a win in that category? You know what, Cassie and I here are going to do a magic trick. You write your answer down, maybe on a bit of paper or in the comments or something, and I'm going to psychically reach out to you through the algorithm to try and work out what you wrote, okay? That's what we're going to do. I'm just reaching out. You voted no, didn't you? Pretty much everybody would, because 2025 has widely been considered pretty piss poor for Dead by Daylight, or at least in the second half of the year. The general community consensus is that more or less every step Behaviour has taken since the Walking Dead chapter has been a mistake on some level, ranging from harmless goofs like Jim the Beam to the monumental cock-up that was the 9.2.0 PTB. And I'm not going to really disagree. A lot of mistakes have happened in this time, and I've been part of the very large and very vocal crowd who's been holding Behaviour's feet to the fire about it lately. But the way I see it, there is something far larger at play here than just a few bad updates. Dead by Daylight feels sick, like it's rotting from within like a dying tree, and to understand the problem in full, we're going to have to look at the bigger picture, at the core motive behind Dead by Daylight's decisions this year. Two little words that could explain away so many of the mistakes, oversights, and cut corners from a company that used to be respected by its players so much more than it is today. Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers, to a phrase that's burying Dead by Daylight this year. No, I can't say that yet. I've not earned the right to say that yet. So, for now, let's talk about player retention.
If they do not succeed at fixing these issues and they waste all this time without new content, that's really bad for the game's health. The player base will be shot, and if they aren't fixing the problems that need to be fixed, that will be really bad.
Our story begins about 2 years ago. Late 2023 to early 2024 saw the game doing pretty well, with a solid run of new characters, perks, and balance adjustments. Alien was the biggest licensed DBD had ever gotten at the time. Chucky, Nick Cage, and Alan Wake were all very surprising solo characters who all found loving audiences, and the Unknown and Sable remained two of the most popular original characters ever made. And Behaviour was actually making smart balanced choices as well. Made for This and Pain Resonance had just gotten nerfed, the anti-3 gen system was introduced, and Skull Merchant got her rework that definitely had its problems, but turned one of those problematic killer designs ever made into something with a lot of skill expression and depth on a shockingly fast turnaround. Remember when Behaviour could totally rework Skull Merchant in 6 months, instead of taking well over a year to even get a design off the ground? I remember those times. They were good times. There were still a couple of nightmares like Ultimate Weapon and 4 People Buckle Up combo out there, but broadly Behaviour were kind of cooking. And crucially, the game was pretty light on bugs as well. DBD will always be a buggy game, but this period of time from, say, Xenomorph up until Vecna was easily one of the most stable in DBD's history. But on August the 5th, 2024, something was announced that would change everything. The Five Nights at Freddy's chapter got revealed with a release date of summer 2025, the 9th anniversary of Dead by Daylight. I just want to get ahead of the comments now, because I'm not trying to say that, FNAF is the reason Dead by Daylight sucks right now. Trust me when I tell you that if that was my opinion, I'd stick it in a video title. Do you know how much engagement How FNAF Killed Dead by Daylight would get? How much interaction I would get for rage baiting the community that hard? I think FNAF definitely expedited some stuff, made some things happen earlier, and possibly more rushed than it would have otherwise been. But the trajectory that the FNAF chapter set us on was one we were going to be taking at some point anyway, even if Scott Cawthon had told Matthew Cote to go fuck himself. The FNAF chapter represented the biggest influx of players DBD has ever seen, and quite likely will ever see. And that gave Behaviour a uniquely huge opportunity to get a shit ton of new players hooked on the DBD content release cycle, and a uniquely huge task to go along with it. Get the game shipshape, and as inviting and addicting as possible to maximise the number of fish caught in the FNAF net. Let's be clear here, FNAF was always going to be a smash hit chapter in terms of sales figures. They could have made Springtrap's Power doing a line of coke off Dwight's ass, and then ripping the car pipes out from the Macmillan estate, and it would still have made enough money to buy Nebraska and turn it into a real-life Rotten Fields. The challenge was making the game as a whole attractive and enticing enough that the FNAF fans would stick around for the long haul. Give a FNAF kid an animatronic, voiced by that guy they like, and they will pay you once. Give them a new way to waste their evening gaming, and they'll pay your bills forever. To maximise this new player retention opportunity, Behaviour had to do three things. Clean up as many of the game's fundamental issues as they could in the year before FNAF came out, stick the landing of the chapter itself to give those newcomers a good experience, and be as attentive as possible in the follow-up, and take action quickly to fix any issues that might be causing players to uninstall once they'd had their fun with FNAF. This was not a small task, but it was a necessary one. Many established creators and players thought the game just wasn't ready for Freddy, so that question had to have occurred to the Behaviour team as well. FNAF would be a major stress test for Behaviour's workmanship on this game, and how well they could capture these new players could make or break DBD's future. Fortunately, Behaviour had already taken their first step in prepping for the game's future by rigging it up to run Unreal Engine 5, a game engine with an international reputation for stability and quality. Unreal Engine 4 was the engine DBD was first developed on, but its last update was in 2021, so it does make sense on paper to go in for the engine upgrade. The engine being actively maintained means they can stay on the cutting edge of the tech, and any issues they find with the code are more likely to be resolved by Epic, the developers who make Unreal Engine. But many games upgrading to UE5 have found themselves plagued with bugs and performance issues that they didn't have before, and the devs working on these games don't know enough about the new engine to fix them properly. Frostpunk 2, Satisfactory, Cyberpunk 2077 all have players with horror stories about the engine jumps to UE5, and the stability of DBD patches since UE5 I think speaks for itself. I'm not saying UE5 is always inherently a bad engine to run on, but a full swap to a new engine known for being temperamental and causing issues in other games would require devs to be on the ball to make repairs, which becomes slightly challenging when Behaviour lays a bunch of them off all at the same time. Satisfactory had a rough time switching to Unreal Engine 5 to begin with, but the devs got things under control and the game is better than ever now. Whether Dead by Daylight's adapted so well in the 18 months after we got Unreal 5, I will leave up to you. Every single major update since Dungeons & Dragons, the first chapter that we got after the engine swap, has had at least one new major bug to go along with it, many of which affected the new content and in some cases still cause issues today. The Aurora and Walking Dead patches were particularly bad for this, but there's one conspicuous exception to this rule. The FNAF patch was pretty much the only stable patch since the UE5 update because, well, it had to be. The map worked nicely, Springtrap was mostly not buggy, and when he did have bugs they were fixed pretty quickly, or at least quicker than most other bugs this year got fixed. He had a bug on release, for example, that made him exit the security doors invisible, but that got fixed within just a week or two. And when he had a visual bug that stopped his head moving while aiming his axe, he got an entire new animation built to smooth that out. Compare this to how the other characters got treated around the same time. Houndmaster, Skull Merchant, Dracula, Knight, Artist, and many more have all been a revolving door of absurd bugs this past year or so, and many of them are still present. But Springtrap didn't just get immediate bug fixes, he got whole new animations to patch up the holes. Hell, Deathsinger has had a similar bug for months where his third-person aiming animation doesn't play properly, and it's still unfixed to this day. They didn't even have to make a new animation for it like they did with Springtrap, they just have to put the old one back. Why did he get a speedy, high-effort fix to a couple of visual bugs on a broadly stable patch drop, when so many killers, including the still fairly new off-the-print Houndmaster, were effectively sparking, smouldering piles of bugs with 20 add-ons and Amori? It's simple, because FNAF was the golden child. It was the one DLC that was guaranteed to bring a lot of eyes to the game, so making it as polished as possible, as quickly as possible, was the best way to retain those players. Behaviour made the decision that ensuring that Springtrap had smooth and functional animations a couple of weeks after he came out had a higher return on investment than making sure that Houndmaster worked at all after half a year, or that Twins worked after almost 5 years. Most existing players who would be put off by these characters not working have already been put off, and most new players will engage with the new content that everybody is playing, so it makes sense from a player retention perspective that fixing this was a priority, even if its actual effects compared to, this, were fairly minimal. Ironically, Springtrap's actually gotten much buggier again in the time after FNAF's release, and Behaviour has been nowhere near as rapid fixing his bugs this time around. Almost like Behaviour prioritised getting the killer functional for their release period to capitalise on the hype, and Behaviour didn't care so much after the fact because Springtrap's role as a new player lightning rod had already been fulfilled. We saw similar issues in patch 9.1.0, when Behaviour actively resisted kill switching streetwise, because apparently it wasn't being used enough to bother with it. Just like with Knight's Drunk Jailer bug, or Merchant's Frozen Beam bug, or Houndmaster's litany of bugs that didn't get fixed for months and crippled their killers but patched out Skull Merchant's compass tech after only a couple of weeks after I made it public. It's not about how serious your bugs are, it's about how conspicuous they are, and how badly they compromise the experience for a wide group of players. How many players you are more likely to retain by prioritising one particular bug fix over another. FNAF was the biggest player retention opportunity of the year, so it got a more stable release and more forensic fixes, at least at the start, than the year's other releases to appeal to the broadest possible collection of players, and the same philosophy is even extended into Springtrap's power design. Springtrap's power is designed to be as approachable as a killer power can be in 2025. It is a short-range projectile that you can zone with effectively, it gives you a little bit of information and speed in a chase after you throw the axe, even if you miss, and the teleport is an inoffensive, easy to use and reliable way to get you where you need to go. If you have ever zoned in DBD before, the basics of Springtrap's power should come to you very quickly, and even if you haven't, it's not like a large weighted projectile that you throw is an unusual concept for a first-person game. While the general reception to Springtrap's power has been pretty solid, I've seen a fair amount of criticism from FNAF fans as soon as his power was revealed, saying that the fire axe didn't really fit him, that it was too generic, or they wanted something a bit more distinct that had a bit more FNAF flair. But that's kind of the problem here, isn't it? The fire axe is a new addition to Springtrap's design that's never been in his canon form before, but it got added because to adequately adapt what he actually does would require a very strange, design-heavy and unique power to better convey his identity. I took a crack at designing a Springtrap power myself when I did Punishment Problems FNAF a few years ago, and the result was a weird Night Dredge type hybrid with AI animatronics pouring out of lockers. A power like that would have been possibly more thematic and expressed the character of Springtrap better, at least some FNAF fans told me so after the power got revealed, but it is worth noting that a power like mine would have been far harder to make, more complicated to understand, especially for newer players, and as such would have been a less effective way of retaining the swarm of new players. An approachable and easily understood power with lots of skills transferable from and to other games and killers was the safest way to retain players, so that is what Behaviour did. Look, I'm not saying that making killers that you know people will easily get into playing is a bad thing. Very far from it. It is important to give newer players, or more casual players, something that they can click with easily, and a lot of people do really like Springtrap. What I'm trying to say here is that these things do come at a cost. And in Springtrap's case, that cost to a lot of players was authenticity. It was the feeling that you were playing Springtrap. His visual design and his sound and everything did all that work, not really his power. That is not a negligible cost, and it's one that can easily be ignored if you're designing a power to retain large numbers of players. To the lowest common denominator, and Springtrap is far from the only case of it in recent releases, because we've got to talk about, well, the dash shop epidemic. Since the release of Chucky, there's been a bit of a habit among behaviours designers of creating powers that are just various different riffs and remixes on dash killers. We have long dashes, we have short dashes, we have killers with multiple abilities, but their best one is a dash. We have a dog that's kind of a projectile but has the same collision and sliding rules as Wesker's dash, so it's functionally and mechanically a dash, even though the killer doesn't dash. We've got Springtrap, who we've already covered, and we've got Unknown. He's just a little guy. We like Unknown. In any case, that is quite a lot of killers who all have the same ability in common. It's dashes all the way down, which has undeniably been great for player retention for many of those killers. Dracula, Chucky, and especially Kaneki have been staple killers who've seen plenty of play since they came out, and after Fly got about 1,000 buffs while his other spells got side grades, Vecna became a pretty regular sight in the trials as well. On Nightlight, you can see that several of these killers are among the most popular in the game, alongside other older dash killers like Blight, Wesker, and Hillbilly. It is clear that these killers have a serious audience who will show up and play them long term, so making more of them is great for player retention, because for the large swath of players who like these killers, they provide a reason to keep coming back. Behaviour refilling your slot bucket every quarter for you to just stick your nose in and guzzle it up. But just like with Springtrap, we paid a price for that reliable player retention, and that price is homogeneity. If you aren't somebody who enjoys dash killers and would rather have something a little bit different, DBD broadly has not been very attractive to you for these past couple of years. I can tell you that from experience. And you might think this is just an issue with the niche minority who don't vibe with these killer archetypes. But you're wrong. Homogeneity affects everyone, and bogs down the archetype for everyone before too long, especially when you realise that the dash killer archetype is not foolproof and regularly creates problems in releases. Look at Kaneki, or more specifically the poor survivors who've had to deal with Kaneki every 3 games for the entirety of 2025. Look at the Krasu, a killer whose power feels designed by committee as a functional reprint of every dash killer released in the past couple of years, only to lose almost all of her players once she got nerfed a bit because there's just no reason to play her over the other dash killers unless she's utterly busted like she was on release. Look at how the killer role as a whole suffered with the palette density update, because the 2 most played killers in the game are Blight and Kaneki, and both of them just kill you if the map isn't hideously stacked up with palettes. And this would be bad enough if it was just new killers doing this, but the Dashlop epidemic has even affected existing killers, and put their identity through a meat grinder as blood sacrifices to appease the gods of player retention. The Shape is the most obvious example here. He got a fairly significant rework on Krasu's release patch that took a slasher not known for moving faster than a brisk walk and turned him into Big Chucky. This drew a lot of detractors at the time, but behaviour kept buffing and buffing him while glancing back at the players' reactions as a contestant on The Price is Right, and that jacked his play rate up enormously because players have been waiting forever for a Myers rework to make him stronger. And as it turns out, a lot of people will accept the character assassination that is Slaughtering Strike to play a Myers that's not D tier. The most egregious example of reworking a power into a dash killer unnecessarily, though, has to be the Skull Merchant design preview earlier in 2025. This absolute failed abortion of design was an obvious mistake clearly designed to appeal to the lowest common denominator, even if it wasn't going to accidentally bring about a horrible hybrid of Twin Singularity and Old School Chess Merchant, which, to be clear, it was. It still represented an obliteration of the character's identity, core skill set, and appeal to the players who appreciate what Merchant is today. It took me and the other Merchant fans lighting a fire under Behaviour's asses twice to finally scupper that rework attempt, which rendered those 6 months that designer Jeff spent doodling it almost entirely wasted. That process not only shattered player confidence in Behaviour when it came to Merchant and future reworks like Trickster, but also delayed Merchant getting any actually good changes, and that pushed the ETA for her rework back well in 2026, long past the second half of 2025 deadline that they'd given themselves when they first nerfed her into the ground. I fear for the future of DBD's killer design, because Behaviour has been going back to the same well over and over again, hoping to mine the same gold that Blight, Wesker and Kaneki did, but Krasu more than anything else has proven that the design space for these powers is becoming increasingly limited. No amount of balancing by spreadsheet or designing by committee can hide the fact that we need a greater diversity of powers these days, that we've been getting for the past couple of years. This has been something I've been ringing the alarm bells on for quite a long time now. My video on dash killers is about a year old now, with Kaneki, Krasu, Myers somehow, and Almost Merchant added to that list. I think that video's aged pretty well. But I imagine there is a good chance I will get some pushback for this area of the video, because a lot of people do really like those killers, so they don't really see why homogeneity in killer powers this way might create a problem. But even the sloppiest of dash killer fans have started to feel the pain of what happens when the tyranny of the majority sets in, and behaviour's desire to cater to that majority starts to dictate things for everybody else. Because let's talk about Operation Health, and most recently, the anti-everything updates.
What seems like behavior trying their hardest to help players escape despite a complete lack of skill on their end. It seems like they're just trying to hold survivor players' hands while the killers are busy drowning in the deep end of the pool filled with pallets an arm's length away.
At the start of 2025, a couple of the devs did a little video announcing that we were about to have a year of game health and quality of life improvements, and the hype around this was palpable. The reason why this was being done this year rather than any other year was obvious. The game had to be in the best state possible for the huge number of players coming in the summer, with the FNAF chapter. And the game was positively lousy with health problems, especially after the diabolically buggy Doomed Course update. And for the first half of the year, we were getting some legitimately great quality of life improvements that made the game better for everyone. I think with how much of a mess behaviour's made lately, we forget the good bits that came up in the health updates in the first half of this year. We got map offerings nerfed, giving up on hook not entirely removed but at least toned down. You can't spam unhooks to grief someone on the hook anymore. We got the abandon system, which is a huge game changer. Survivor blood points were jacked up across the board, and skill checks as you get off gens became much more forgiving. Hell, we even got some good stuff in the second half too, like anti-camp being visible on the HUD, and custom scratch mark colours in just the last update. There has been some good stuff that's made the game feel better on both sides, but it has been overshadowed almost entirely by the absolute clown fiesta that was the 9.2.0 and 9.3.0 anti-everything changes. If you're watching this video, you almost certainly don't need me to remind you about these changes, because you probably watched as the community imploded on not just one, but two separate PTBs. You don't need me to run through all of the catastrophic ideas behaviour tried to implement, then scrapped, and tried to ship again, and then scrapped again, because they could just not stop giving survivors steroids. I've already made videos on both those updates, so go watch those if you want my opinions on them, but what's more interesting to me now is why they were done. Why changes that seemed so obviously unbalanced were making it to the PTB twice? And the answer is pretty self-evident. So much so, in fact, that they actually said it in the community livestream.
Why are we doing these things? Why are we looking at these strategies that people employ to play the game? It's quite simple. Face camping, tunneling, and slugging were in the top 5 reasons for people uninstalling the game. And, we as developers and myself as a player, we want the game to last long. So to make sure that that happens and that the game can keep going as long as it can, we have to address the issues that people have, or the players have within the game. So face camping, slugging, and tunneling are 3 of the issues that we have to address.
Right here, from behaviour's perspective, that is all the reason needed to make these changes. Not to make the game more balanced, but to make the game easier to persist with, to make it stickier, to improve player retention by lowering uninstalls. On these community live streams and dev updates, there's very little mention of these changes making the game more balanced. Just more fun, more engaging, more retentive. And the stats they throw at us are not kill rates, but just how often these things happen and how much they contribute to player retention. Jeff doesn't make the argument that these enormous survivor buffs are the right balanced decision, but instead that they are needed for the game's longevity. So when people ask me, do behaviour not play their own game? How could they think this is balanced? The simple answer is, they don't. And they're doing it anyway, because their job is not to make a balanced game, but a retentive one. This should not be surprising. After all, it has happened before. Behaviour has thrown balance to the wind and given in to the demands of large groups of players before at the cost of actual health and sustainability. I remember it very well, because it happened to my favourite killer a year ago. If you were around then, you'll remember it. a mediocre at best killer being gutted, not because it would make the balance better, if anything she was a bit on the weak side, but because the complaints about her were so loud and so vocal that gutting her was a way to save face, to shut up the complaints and get people talking about something else. I remember when it happened, I warned people that this set a bad precedent, that the balancing of the game was being used not to make a better and fairer game experience, but to effectively act as PR, to cater to a loud group of whiners. And I remember being told that I was overreacting. My concerns about treating the balance of this game like a witch trial was laughed off. Well, who's laughing now? They just tried to give the Skull Merchant treatment to the entire killer role. Twice. In 3 months. The post-Walking Dead era, and especially the 9.2.0 PTB onwards, felt like all of the problems of the past year or so coming home to roost. That DBD is paying the consequences of focusing on retention, on drawing in and keeping new players over stability so clearly now that no amount of jangling keys in front of the community can hide it anymore. Behaviour's 3-step plan to capture the new players from the FNAF chapter failed at the final hurdle. We have a huge influx of new players that Behaviour tried to retain through balance changes catered to prevent them uninstalling by their own admission. But the solutions were so game-breaking that the bad PR they generated and wasted dev time that came from scrapping them has collapsed community confidence in Behaviour and their future for the game. But let's not forget what else we've lost in this past year. The other costs that we've paid for Behaviour optimising player retention at the expense of literally everything else. Power designs have become safe and homogenized to maximize their broad appeal at the cost of depth, innovation, or identity. Patches have become less stable as glossy new features and engine updates are rushed out, while unfixed bugs pile up and patch QA has effectively been discontinued. And any features or areas of the game that don't immediately spike player retention and capture new players in that way have been delayed, scrapped, or just left to rot. Let me show you what I mean. Open DBD, click on the Hound Master, open the store, and try to buy a skin for her. You'll see a list of skins, a couple of recolors, some high rarity new outfits, and the ultimate Hound Master Visceral skin with the new dog. It was just over a year since Hound Master came out now, and that is the exact same list of skins you could buy for her on the day she came out. The only skins that she's received since then at all have been limited time event ones. The Blood Moon event outfit that you could buy, and the event cosmetics like the Anniversary Mask and Frosty Weapon. No new releases to the store for her in the year after her release. Not even Twins were neglected this badly, but the impossibly buggy killer released in the middle of 4 giant licenses somehow didn't do great. And her $20 mediocre looking skin that you couldn't even play with in the event on the month she came out didn't sell as well as Behaviour were anticipating for some reason, so she gets nothing now, ever at all. She is an abandoned killer by the skin design team because her release didn't generate hype on the level of her contemporaries, so they gave up before even really trying. We can see this on a broader scale with the approach to DBD's lore over the past year or so. Behaviour wanted to get the quest system out the door in time for FNAF's release, but couldn't figure out how to integrate the lore into it. So instead of delaying the quests until they could, we just didn't get any new lore for 6 months until Sinister Grace came out. They were willing to ship an unfinished system and leave DBD's original world building in the dust for half a year because having the system out in time for those new players was more important than your own game's lore. Because if there's one thing FNAF fans would never stick around for, it's games that care about their lore, am I right? It extends even further than just this year too. Only a month after FNAF and DBD got announced, Behaviour announced the closure of Midwinter Entertainment and the cancellation of Project T, the co-op multiplayer shooter set in the Dead by Daylight universe, in the entity's realm but outside the trials. Early feedback from playtesters was really promising. The reactions to what had been shown were electric, but for some reason the game got axed shortly after the first playtest, and Midwinter Entertainment's employees either got let go or were absorbed into Behaviour. Not too long after that, the casting of Frank Stone dropped, and despite the game having its issues that I've gone over before, the community as a whole was still pretty hyped about the idea of Frank Stone as a future original killer. But at PAX this year, that got shot down too. with the original plan being to turn him into a Trapper legendary skin, but that got cancelled too, and now one of the most anticipated non-playable characters in DBD's history is living in limbo with an uncertain future in the fog. Even the Creator program, a massively anticipated rework to the old Fog Whisperer system that saw the community galvanised, has been put on ice. It's been 6 months or more now, and 99% of people have heard nothing. Guess they've all just been too busy. In the world of Dead by Daylight, 2025 has been defined by colossal licenses like FNAF and Tokyo Ghoul that were record-breakingly popular. All-time peaking player counts and major system updates like the quests. But it's perhaps been defined even more by what we've lost this year. The costs paid by behaviour trying to get the game ready for Freddy. If it doesn't attract, retain or monetize the new players this year, behaviour is willing to let it go through a meat grinder. Innovative and unique power designs for new killers, high quality reworks finished on time, and with respect shown to the existing players, patches that aren't infested with bugs, a balanced gameplay experience, features arriving to the game finished, literally any lore at all, even a regular release schedule for new content. We burned it all for player retention. Whether or not all this was worth it, I will leave up to you. All that leaves is one simple question. Why? Why is behaviour so relentlessly pursuing player retention, especially new player retention, even as the game is burning around them? Well, the simple answer is fuck, I still can't say it yet. Damn, that is really annoying. Well, to actually answer this question, I feel like I need to break a misconception. This is one you'll hear all the time from players. DBD just needs competition. DBD is the only asim horror game that stood the test of time over the years and kind of made it into the big leagues. Surely if another one came along that could threaten their dominance, they'd have to lock in or lose players. And I just want to burst that bubble for you a little bit and say that DBD has plenty of competition, just not in the way you think it does.
But with this year, 2023, we have another shot at an asymmetrical coming into this space and possibly surviving with the addition of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
DBD is not competing to make a good asymmetrical horror game. A lot of publishers have already made good asymmetrical horror games, and most of them died a horrible death. By all accounts, Evil Dead, VHS, Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, even Behavior's own Death Garden, they were good asymmetrical games. And they died because they were not competing with what Behavior is actually doing, making an addictive, retentive player experience that can monopolise a player's time and keep you in the game system so they can sell you stuff. Because in the world of making live service games, making a good game does not guarantee that your game will survive and thrive, but making an addictive one almost certainly does. And Behaviour is pretty practiced at this. Between constant content drops and events to keep you logging in, meta shakeups on the regular to stop players getting complacent and bored, and battle passes and cosmetics to monetize those players once you've got them coming back for more, they have successfully made a highly addictive money machine, capable of monopolizing players' time effectively. But in this, Behaviour most definitely has competition. In the world of ASIMs, they are a big fish in a small pond. But in the world of addictive, live service time sinks, they are a great white shark in the Pacific Ocean. Big, but far from the biggest, and this ocean is full of leviathans and sea monsters that make a great white look like a sardine. DBD is swimming in the same waters as live service leviathans like Fortnite, League of Legends, Rainbow Six Siege, Overwatch, Apex Legends, Valorant, whatever friend slop flavour of the month is out right now, and basically anything else in the top categories on Twitch. Every one of these games is fighting tooth and nail for your time, so they can get you addicted and monetize you with cosmetics and DLCs and battle passes. And most if not all of these games have something DBD does not. Basically infinite money to invest in improving the game at any given time. Overwatch is the clearest example of that principle in action. In preparation for the transition to Overwatch 2, Overwatch went through a 2.5-year content drought, with Echo being the last hero added in April 2020, before a long wait for Overwatch 2 to drop with 3 new heroes in October 2022. No new heroes, only recycled seasonal events, and even limited new skin releases, which were mostly recolors of existing ones anyway, meant that there was very little reason to get into Overwatch in that time. Everyone was just waiting for Overwatch 2. This was the period where Overwatch stopped being my primary game in favour of Dead by Daylight, which led me to where I am today talking to you, so, silver linings. But throughout this constant hibernation, the game stayed alive. Development for Overwatch 2 kept going, even as costs ballooned, deadlines slipped, and the creative vision changed away from the PvE model, because Overwatch is owned by Blizzard, and Blizzard has fuck you money. So Overwatch was able to run at a loss for years, while the infinite money Activision Blizzard has been cultivating since the early days of WoW and Call of Duty subsidised Overwatch 2's development. The game effectively didn't make money for over 2 years, while the investment was being made into improving it. And while some stuff did get compromised, Overwatch 2 was still a huge shake-up that fundamentally changed the game and made it what it is today. Something similar is happening with Deadlock right now, a new Valve game in its alpha playtesting stage. The game is massively popular for an alpha playtest. It peaked at 171,000 players, which is higher than DBD's peak, and the game is not even in beta yet, much less a full release. And as such, it has no monetization at all. No skins, no battle pass, every character is free, and anyone can play Deadlock as long as they have a friend with the game. The game is being actively developed and constantly worked on, but it's got more polish and attention than any alpha I've ever seen. And the reason it has all of this is because it's backed by fucking Valve, one of the highest revenue per employee companies in the world because of their monopoly on PC gaming sales via Steam. Deadlock has been in public alpha for 18 months now. It will be for at least a good several months more, and will then go through a public beta for an unknown amount of time before release, and it will go through all of that without making a penny in revenue. But the dev team can afford to do that and take their time improving the game, because as long as they're confident in making their investment back eventually, Valve has the capital to fund Deadlock's development forever if they want to. It's the same story for all of these big enduring live service titles. They all have these big corporate sugar daddies investing in them so they can keep developing even when they're in the red. Riot has Tencent money to keep League and Valorant funded and, buy out animation studios because they're bored. Epic owns the Unreal Engine so Fortnite can afford to splash out on fancy licenses to keep players around. Marvel Rivals has the combined corporate monoliths of NetEase and fucking Disney backing them. Apex Legends has EA and possibly soon the Saudi government paying its development bills. What does DBD have? Don't get me wrong, Behaviour has a lot of money. They have made a shed-load of money from Dead by Daylight, but they don't have the mega conglomerate money their competition has, and DBD is all they have. The game has to run in the black basically all the time. They cannot afford to run at a loss for a while or dip into deep reserves to fix stuff for years like the big boys can. The meme might actually be true. When you realise the tables they're playing at, I guess Behaviour really are a small indie company. The money to fund DBD's continued development has to come directly from its revenue, and the ever-increasing costs of licensing fees building up more and more over time inevitably chip away at that investment pot. While we're here, now might be a good opportunity to talk about the role licenses play in this whole DBD economy, because the way in which they're monetized is inherently different from original chapters, and that will have an effect on DBD's player retention and revenue. First thing to be aware of is that the sale of a skin for a new character is far more profitable than the sale of that character. A skin has the costs associated with designing, modelling and marketing it before it can start making money, and a character has all these costs as well, on top of actually making their mechanical stuff, their power, their perks, any unique animations, all the extra assets for their perks and add-ons and other in-game icons and effects, along with the costs of maintaining and bug fixing them. Take into account the fact that skins often cost more than the character themselves, and you'll realise that skins are way more profitable than characters, especially for survivors, since survivor models are simpler and do not have character-unique animations to consider. That is how original chapters make their money. Behaviour might struggle to quickly recoup development costs on just selling a new original chapter, but as the years go on, eventually the sales of the skins should pay for development costs, and beyond that, any sales of the chapter or its skins are pure profit. Licenses don't work like this, because licenses have recurring costs associated with them that originals don't have. The licensing fees that Behaviour has to pay on a regular basis. The initial rush of buyers who pick up a chapter on release because it has Springtrap or Chucky or whatever will be larger than an original, sometimes much larger. But the license holders will take some of that money, and as sales drop off over time, the licensing fees will remain a recurring cost that Behaviour still has to pay, even if nobody's buying the chapter anymore. You might think skin revenue would help make up for this, and it's sort of on the right track, but this is more awkward too, because not only will IP holders take a cut of your skin profits, many license holders will make creating skins for their characters difficult if not impossible. Some IP holders, like Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street, will never let Behaviour make skins for their characters, and even in cases like Capcom, Konami or FNAF, where the license holder is more accommodating, Behaviour still does not have full creative control over what gets made, how and when it gets released, or how they can market it. Licenses will inherently be more awkward to monetize than originals on a per-sale basis, and due to the cost of licensing, Behaviour makes less per sale from licensed skins than they do from originals. They just make way more sales. This means that the only thing making licenses more financially appealing than originals is name recognition and initial hype bringing in loads of buyers. Hoping whichever big name they're bringing in will sell the chapter to so many more players than an original that it'll make back development costs immediately. Or failing that, sell the character to so many people that any skins they can squeeze out of the IP holders will be hits, and make their profit that way, so they can fund the licensing fees for that chapter and others in the future. But these licensing costs do not get cheaper. They will be an escalating, stacking cost over the years that will only increase the more licensed chapters we get, which is a problem when any chapter sales figures will naturally go down over time as more people buy the character. Perhaps the best showcase of this theory in action might be if you were to compare Artist to the two licensed killers released on either side of her, Pinhead and Sadako. I fully believe both of these two licenses sold more upfront than the Artist did. They are both cool licenses, and all three characters had good teachable perks that are worth getting at the time, especially Pinhead. But if you were to go back today, which of these three killers do you think has made more money? Do you think it's the one that you can't buy anymore? The one that Behaviour made 3 or 4 skins for and are still paying the licensing fees for? Or do you think it's the original who regularly gets cosmetics, including multiple legendary outfits? Just, food for thought. Ever-increasing costs alongside ever-diminishing revenue is not a sustainable combination. It means that over the long term, original chapters will start to subsidize licenses, which is a problem when Behaviour makes 2 or 3 licensed releases for every original these days. And these originals regularly get neglected in development like Doomed Course did, in a way that licenses tend not to so much. Turns out when you're negotiating with a big company to use their characters, you might take it a bit more seriously. Hello, baby. Hello, kissy. I've got my neck. There are a number of things Behaviour could try to do to mitigate this issue, and the most obvious is more licensed cosmetics. We are getting more skins for licensed characters now than we've ever gotten before, and while the IP holder will still take a cut of those profits, the increased reach can give these licensed characters a similar long-term sales stability to originals. Ghostface and Chucky stand out to me as characters who are getting cosmetics so regularly that they're basically on the same schedule as our original killers, and those are the kind of licenses that can sustain themselves long-term, so long as the rights holders keep playing ball. But that is not an option for every license, and that leaves a logical next step here that nobody wants Behaviour to have to make. Cutting off licenses that are not able to sustain themselves financially. There are a lot of licenses, especially the very old ones, who either have extremely limited or totally non-existent skin releases, and those licenses are liable to become money pits after several years, because eventually, most of the people who would have wanted Michael or Freddy or whatever will have already bought them, and the licenses then start generating minimal revenue for Behaviour while they had to keep paying their fees. This is most apparent for the oldest licenses that we have, where basically we've never had skins for almost a decade, but some newer licenses don't get skins either. Kaneki has not had a single skin since he came out at the start of the year, and there is no guarantee that he ever will. Side note, I bet Behaviour are kicking themselves right now about not putting Kaneki's power on an original killer, because even if Kaneki's name being attached doubled the sales of the chapter, they could easily have made that money back by releasing skins for whichever original got his power over the years. Imagine an original killer as popular to play as Kaneki, getting 3 or 4 skins every year for the rest of DBD's existence. Now that would have been a sustainable source of income forever. Look, I don't have Behaviour's numbers here. I don't know what could be necessary to sustain the game's escalating costs of maintenance. For all we know, things are hunky-dory right now. But they spent the past year or two shutting down projects and laying off employees, so make of that what you will. Similarly, I don't know if cost-cutting measures, like the one I suggested, are necessary in the foreseeable future, but a model of infinite growth is inherently unsustainable. Some licensed chapters will be able to sustain themselves through regular skin sales, but some will not. And sooner or later, things will need to change to get the game sustainable. And if Behaviour can't pull it off in time, the consequences could be dire in the long term once those bills start to add up. If the plan is for Behaviour to run every year going forward in the same way they've run 2025, the future of Dead by Daylight is clear. The game will be optimised even more than it already has been towards the acquisition, retention, and monetization of new players. Expect more licensed content designed to catch headlines and spread the game's appeal as broad as possible. Expect more hand-holding and homogenization on the design level, as everything is built to be as approachable as possible at the cost of depth and skill expression. And future powers, perks, and systems are exclusively built to cater to the lowest common denominator. Expect areas of the game that matter more to enfranchised players, like the game's lore, long-standing bugs, and especially the maintenance of older characters, to become more and more forgotten. And expect more predatory monetization as Behaviour needs to squeeze newcomers as hard as they can, in the limited window before they become enfranchised too, and understand the game isn't built for them anymore. But this is a model that cannot last forever. There is a finite amount of growth in this market, especially as licensing fees pile up in the background. There will come a time when the gravy train stops, where they run out of licenses to acquire or new players to attract with shiny gimmicks. It might be in 2 years, it might be in 5 years, it might be in 10 years, or it might be happening right now, behind closed doors at Behaviour, where we wouldn't know. So what happens when that day comes, and the heat death of Dead by Daylight begins?
I'm very, very disappointing, and all of this is really mentally making me check out of this game as we go further and further. This game is just going into a different direction of what I think the game needs, and it's just a sad thing to see.
Assuming those issues were to build up over time and Behaviour never figured out how to address them, the logical endpoint here is that the company becomes unable to maintain its escalating costs. The game's stuffed with old licenses that they can't easily monetize because they're paying out the ass to the IP holders, meaning that when they have to cut off the tap and stop paying the fees, a huge amount of their content becomes unavailable for purchase, their revenue stream being gone for good. More than anything else, that could be the death blow that kills Dead by Daylight stone dead. But what's far more likely for a game with this size and notoriety would be a buyout. Remember those big fish from earlier? Those massive game companies with the huge liquidity pools? DBD is a big game with a very valuable IP, a monopoly on its niche ASIM market, and a bunch of developers at Behaviour who are very specialised in making this game function properly. Well, Behaviour's version of properly. So I would expect one of those big fish to come along and buy up Behaviour and Dead by Daylight's IP should the game become insolvent, or ever even really close to insolvent. In terms of buyers to watch out for, I would keep an eye out for Ubisoft. They already have a huge studio in Montreal and good connections at Behaviour, or potentially Epic Games, since DBD is one of the biggest Unreal Engine games out there, and they could potentially try and use it to filch the game away from Steam. But if you want my bet, I would watch out for Blumhouse. Think about it for a second. Blumhouse is trying to become the one-stop shop for horror, and they've been trying to get into the gaming space with mixed success for quite some time now. Supplementing or even replacing the Blumhouse gaming division with Behaviour in a buyout would be huge for this. They get a game with an established player base, a monopoly on their corner of the market, and a bunch of specialised devs to maintain it. Hello, Cassie. There she's She's chilling. And they could get access to the DBD IP, meaning that every original character and story we've ever made becomes something Blumhouse can use in a movie or a show or something. And any past or future Blumhouse creations become viable inclusions for chapters later down the line. They're constantly making new franchises or buying old ones like Halloween or Saw, and fast-tracking them into Dead by Daylight as licensed chapters, possibly as marketing for new and upcoming releases, would be a great way to advertise new products to a gaming audience who might not otherwise care. Just saying, Jason Blum, if behaviour goes tits up in a few years and you've got several million in cash hanging around, might be worth throwing your hat into the ring. Okay, I know I've just gone on one hell of a tangent, but I hope you see what I'm trying to do here. Right now, Behaviour is building the game's future on the hopes of unlimited growth. The massive income flux from new licenses, paying the cost up for older ones, and just continuing to do that forever as the costs of licensing fees pile up over time. This is not sustainable. It won't last forever. And Behaviour's wild swings at player retention this year are evidence of that. They are desperately scrambling to keep and retain as many new players as possible at the cost of everything else, because the monetization model depends on increasingly massive windfalls to keep everything running. It's like they've got a leak in their boat, and they're ripping chunks off of the boat to build buckets to bail the water out. Sure, that might work for a time, but before long you'll just have 2 leaks to deal with because you ripped a chunk out of your boat while the first leak is still pouring water in. So you rip off more of your boat, you make more buckets, and you start bailing out the water faster. But that just makes more leaks, until you keep going and going and going until you haven't got a boat anymore, and you're sitting at the bottom of the ocean under a giant pile of buckets. A model built around infinite growth will never last by definition. Everything has its limit. Eventually the new customers cannot afford to pay for the old costs, and the juice is no longer worth the squeeze. It's a story we see in the real-life economy all the time, from necessities like housing to luxuries for the rich and stupid like cryptocurrency. The entire world economy is built on having an infinite supply of new people to monetize, infinite workers to make your goods, and infinite consumers to buy them. And the same is true whether we're talking about global financial megacorps or fictional glup shittos in a video game about pallets. I think I finally earned the right to say it now. Late-stage capitalism is the final boss of Dead by Daylight. I'm sorry, this has been the second video in a row where I've become that one friend that's too woke. I promise that is not the intention that I had when I wrote this. If you're a newcomer to the channel, I promise it's not always like this. But you do see where I'm coming from though, right? Under its current business model, the game is predicated on every new thing being the new biggest ever. On scraping in new players with big name licenses and keeping them here to sell things to them, at any cost to the game's quality or sustainability. If you leave, it doesn't matter. There'll be a new player coming in to replace things soon, and they haven't bought any chapters yet. We've seen so much sacrificed in this pursuit of player retention and acquisition. An overdose of licensed chapters guaranteed to snag headlines, while originals are left to rot. Half-baked features forced out to coincide with player spikes, like Unreal Engine 5, the Go Next Prevention, and the Quest system, meaning they barely work once they arrive in the game, or leave critical features like the tomes out. And most recently, a string of balanced decisions that wreck the gameplay experience, not to make more balanced matches, but as a quick and easy fix to players uninstalling the game once they get tunneled out by a ghost face. Without the numbers in front of us, it's hard to tell how long this is going to go on for, whether Behaviour is currently able to sustain the game's cost, or whether cutbacks were needed in the long term. What the endgame here is a mystery. Maybe we will just be shambling along on the back of bigger and bigger licenses, bigger and bigger player spikes while the game itself decays from within. Maybe Behaviour will be able to right the ship, or maybe the game will get bought out from under us, and whichever big fish gets ownership of DBD next starts squeezing us, the players, in pursuit of a return on their investment. It's a scary future to consider, but it leaves us with one important question left to answer. Why am I smiling? I'm smiling because I know it doesn't have to be this way. I know that DBD can be better than it is today. The future is not set in stone. Things can get better. And to that end, I have a couple more misconceptions I'd like to break. The first being the idea that the devs at Behaviour are just in it for the money. Trust me, they're not.
They're going to get rid of the strategies, the things you enjoy, and they're going to change it into what they think is their perspective, the best thing for DBD. And they're going to do it the whole way without a massive amount of compromise on their end.
Behaviour used to have quite a good reputation for treating their developers well, because they were vocally against dev crunch. A lot of game studios overwork their developers because they leverage the devs' love for their projects to push them to do more and more work. The fact that Behaviour didn't, and to my knowledge still doesn't do this, is laudable. Crunch is admittedly less normalised now than it was maybe 5-10 years ago, but my point still stands. However, that does not mean these devs are well compensated for their work. Everything I've read about from Behaviour staff these past few years indicate that many devs are underpaid compared to industry standards. Steph, DBD's former UX designer, posted her salary in Canadian dollars when she worked at Behaviour compared to when Epic picked her up a few years later for senior UX design on Fortnite, and the difference is absurd, almost twice as much. Side note, Steph was an amazing dev, and a lot of the great UX changes that we've seen in the past several years have been down to her. So she is worth every penny Epic is paying her. Admittedly, part of the discrepancy is just US salaries being built different compared to the Canadian companies she worked for before, but the story is consistent if you look at Behaviour's Glassdoor page. You see lots of the same stories. Great teams working on exciting projects with a really healthy work-life balance, but disappointing pay and poor managers, with special contempt among reporting employees for the CEO. That reminds me, before we move on, I noticed something while checking Glassdoor's reports on pay at Behaviour. Racine, the CEO of Behaviour Interactive, has a 33% approval rating on Glassdoor, which is less than half the average CEO approval rating of 73%, and the reviews give us an idea as to why that might be. Reviews that claim to be from several different employees on the site suggest that he's showing off a lavish lifestyle. Multiple reviews mention a helicopter that he brags about while his employees are still paid below industry standard. He talks a big game about how financially stable the company is, while the staff barely get pay raises to keep up with inflation, and the studio is laying people off and shuttering projects. Apparently, he threatened to replace employees upset by Behaviour's change to the work from home policy. And in one case, an anonymous team leader had this to say: "We are under the impression that the aging CEO is doing all of this just to make the company more sellable, while flushing away everything they promised to the current employees." Interesting. So all of this kind of puts into perspective everything I've talked about in this video so far about how they're just trying to maximize the numbers of players they can sell to at the cost of everything else. So if you're looking for someone to blame for all of that, for the poor management that we've seen demonstrated throughout the years, the layoffs and the cancellations and the strange direction the game's going in right now, look out. That's all I'm saying. God, I'm not going on the creator program at this rate, am I? The point I was trying to make before I fell down that rabbit hole is that the game is held together by developers who fundamentally give a shit about making something good. When Jeff said, if the players are happy, we're happy, I fully believe him. And this is a good sign because I would rather have a bunch of well-intentioned devs who do make their fair share of mistakes than a bunch of highly competent devs who are solely motivated by money because all of their competence will therefore be spent not on improving your game, but on opening your wallet. Although these devs should definitely be paid more, that is not an excuse to keep underpaying them, Jesus Christ. Well-intentioned devs who care genuinely about the product they are working on and the community they're making it for are what we need to turn this game around and make some good progress towards a sustainable future for Dead by Daylight. And on a small scale, this is happening right now with, of all things, the Skull Merchant update. The Skull Merchant update has been a roller coaster. She was shot in the head to calm down player complaints as Behaviour's first resort. It would have taken, time, effort, nuance to actually try and address her issues in the year before they gutted her, and it was easier just to make a public example of her to calm down the angry mob. 6 months later, we saw the design previews hit, and they look like an extension of this, turning her into a flashy dash killer in a way that turned people's heads and might bring new attention to the character, but was deeply flawed in so many different ways. If it ever hit the live game, there'd be this brief rush of excitement as basically a whole new killer came out, but it would be a can of worms that you never wanted to open. That rework was an atrocity, and we would lose the Skull Merchant that we have today to get it. So me and the other merchant players protested. We voiced our concerns in no uncertain terms, but there's not that many of us. It would have been really easy for Behaviour to ignore our concerns and press on with the design previews. We could have even had it on the 9.3.0 PTB. But they didn't. They listened. They realised what they were doing was too much, and far too flawed to make it into the game. So they wound it back and settled for some buffs, to tide us over until a more reasonable rework can be made eventually. And these buffs are great. They're exactly what the killer needed, and we're even getting an undetectable change in upcoming hotfix, which reflected my precise feedback on the initial changes. I've gone from being doom-appalled about the future of my favourite killer to having never been more optimistic about her, because Behaviour's designers have shown they care, have shown they will listen to us, and have demonstrated that making a rock-solid design that keeps her players happy while improving her issues is more important than a flashy but barely functional mess that turns heads, but would likely need another rework shortly after it dropped. The devs approached the Skull Merchant in the year since her gutting, and perhaps more saliently the months since the design previews, is a good sign, I think. We're witnessing devs changing to a more sustainable, reasonable stance in real time, listening more to community feedback, especially from the experts, like yours truly over here, than they ever have before. And that's an attitude that becomes replicated throughout 2026 and beyond on a much larger scale than the merchant changes. We might just be able to see the ship set right again. The game doesn't need to grow anymore, at least not at a high rate for a long time. It needs to be able to accommodate the growth it's already had, to become sustainable at its current size, and Behaviour needs to stop chasing trends, to stop moving fast and breaking things, and getting big name licenses so they can squeeze in IGN interviews. We need to recover from the colossal damage done by relentlessly chasing player retention and leaving everything else by the wayside. Maybe we will see unprofitable licenses removed from the store to stop the added costs bleeding Behaviour dry. Maybe we will see a shift back towards originals that will regularly generate skin revenue without needing to pay licensing fees. Maybe we'll see QA return to the game to save devs a huge amount of eventual time and effort spent on endless bug fix patches after every single new release. Maybe we'll see a diversity of killer power designs like we used to, so that every killer that's released feels like they have a place in the game. So that killers like Krasu that suffer from the design space they were stuffed into never happen again. And maybe management of this company will change so that devs have the means and the leadership to make these improvements and do what's best for everyone. It is not a certainty. I dare say it may not even be likely, but there is a chance. And we have the dev team and the community that both want this game to be the best it can be. To be better than it has been in 2025. Doesn't all this sound better to you? And for those of you worried about growth, worried that DBD will never get as big as it was during the FNAF period, it is quite possible, but I don't think that's inherently a bad thing. New player acquisition is important, but as long as it's enough to replace the attrition of leaving players and keep the game running, we don't need every chapter to be a FNAF explosion. In fact, it might be better that way. And that is one more misconception I want to crush before this video ends. FNAF isn't necessarily the biggest DBD we'll ever get in terms of player count, guaranteed. It might be, there's a good chance it is, but it's by no means a certainty. And there is one event in DBD's foreseeable future that could well propel the game's player count even further. The Dead by Daylight movie.
But ultimately, it really comes down to the feedback that we get. If it's really, really positive and you guys are happy, then we're happy.
The DBD movie in production by Blumhouse has been very, very quiet this year. We know basically nothing about its production at all. Presumably it's been put in stasis for a bit because Blumhouse has been pouring resources into the FNAF movie and its sequel. But with the runaway successes of those films, I have every confidence the DBD movie is still happening. And if it's good and successful, we could see DBD truly, genuinely hitting the mainstream for the first time. Maybe not Arcane levels of mainstream, but, adjacent. Imagine in 5 or so years' time we hear people saying things like the biggest trap of the DBD movie was getting people to install DBD, like Arcane did with League of Legends. That, with the right script and production, could be DBD's future down the line. And if that day comes, it will not be because of licensed glup shitters like we get every few months these days. It will be a triumph of DBD's original storytelling and world building, a celebration of the dark world of the entity unlike any other, and I cannot wait to see it when it's finally out. So where does this leave us? I think it's clear to admit now, Dead by Daylight cannot have more years like 2025. There have been bits that a lot of people have liked, but even the best bits can't be separated from the cost that we've paid to get them. Five Nights at Freddy's was enormously popular, but with how many features got rushed out to accommodate its arrival, the game still hasn't really recovered. Tokyo Ghoul brought us one of the most popular killers ever, but he will be really hard to monetize going forward because Behaviour have a licensing addiction. And the solidification of the Dashlop killer archetype means that Krasu, who came out right after him, felt kind of homeless. Behaviour tried to capture the Kaneki Wesker Blight sort of Billy lightning in a bottle, and all it did was give us no reason to play her over those killers. DBD's recent successes have all been part and parcel of its recent failures, all revolving around getting those installs up and those uninstalls down. We've sacrificed so much in the name of growth that's metastasized and warped the game around it in ways both benign and damaging. You know what doctors call unbridled growth that warps the body and changes its core function? Cancer. And we need to take care, change course, focus on making the game healthy before making it big. The devs and the players want DBD to succeed, so let's work together for a sustainable future before it's too late. Oh, and Cassie has something to say. Hey, what's that, Cass? What's that? Fire Remy Racine? Well, I suppose if you've got the time. Yeah, in case you're watching, Remy, just get in that helicopter of yours and fuck off. We've got a game to fix. See you next time.